There is, I mean, the United States, to an extent that's unusual among the countries of the world, maybe unique, has actually dealt to a certain matter, to a certain extent, with the fact that it's a multi-ethnic society. Most societies are very, extremely racist. This is particularly true of Europe, which must be the most racist part of the world there is, outside of maybe Japan. And the racism is so deep in Europe that it's very striking for a North American to come over to see how dramatic the racism is, meaning the hatred of everybody else, even, you know, a couple of miles away, you know, and the loyalty to particular, you know, communities and purist communities and so on and so forth. I mean, the U.S. is bad enough on these issues, but it has come to terms with these questions at a level well beyond Europe, at least the parts of Europe I've seen and know about, France, Germany, and so on, England, etc. And one of the things that has come along in the United States in recent years, part of it, there's been a kind of a cultural revival in the last 20 or 30 years in the United States, to some extent everywhere, but strikingly in the United States. The country's a lot more civilized than it used to be, in many respects. Now, this hasn't really infected educated circles very much. They're kind of immune. But the general population has changed a lot in all kind of ways. And one of the ways it's changed is that there's a lot more respect for other cultures and other people, and a recognition that you should accord them some, you know, rights. Now, it's not done very nicely, and it's often extremely ugly, but at least the concepts are around, and the feeling is around that you ought to do it. This is reaching the universities. For the last 20 years, it's reached the universities in connection with the study of what's called Canon, meaning what's the course of study that everybody has to go through, the sort of core readings that everybody has to go through, you know. So traditionally, the canon has been, you know, you read Homer and Plato and Shakespeare and, you know, a couple of other things. I mean, that's the canon. It's what people caricature as dead white males, okay? You don't read contemporary literature. You don't read literature from Africa. You don't read women's literature. You know, all kind of other things you just don't read. They're somewhere on the outside. They're not in the canon. Well, that's been challenged. People have suggested that we ought to have a much more complex canon in which you don't stop reading Shakespeare, but you read Shakespeare together with, so maybe you read The Tempest, you know, Shakespeare's account of the Columbian conquests, together with, say, Las Casas, or even better, with some of the Aztec chronicles that describe it the way it looked from the points of view of the people who were getting slaughtered. You know, maybe you should look at the whole business. You know. And similarly across the board. There are the idea is there are a lot of different other forms of human culture besides the canon that has been the ruling aristocracy in the ruling societies. And there's a big fight about this. I mean, it's a huge battle. And I don't think the answers are always simple. Like, you know, if you ask, should you stop reading Shakespeare? Well, sure, you shouldn't stop reading Shakespeare. On the other hand, a lot of the stuff about the canon is sheer fraud. The fact of the matter is, it's true that everybody went through that canon. Like everybody read the Iliad, and everybody read Hamlet, and everybody read the Republic. And 99.9% of the people who read all that stuff don't remember one word about it. You know, it went in their eyes, it came out of their hands when they had to write an exam, and then they forgot about it. So for all meaningful purposes, they didn't read it, you know, because it wasn't related in any way to anything in their lives or in any experience and so on and so forth. And part of the argument in favor of enriching the canon by bringing in a broader range of situations and cultures and so on is that you can make this newer canon alive. You know, you can make it meaningful to people by relating it to things that matter to them. You can show them that when they read Shakespeare, they're reading about things that really happen to people, here and now, not just, you know, in Elizabethan England. And that's a different approach to the canon itself, of course. And that interrelates. Well, there's an enormous battle about this. And some of the things that are coming out are really amazing. For example, the cultural conservatives, as they're called, who oppose any modification of the canon, have argued, well, for example, Saul Bellow, contemporary American novelist, he said at one point that he didn't see any point in reading literature from Africa because there isn't any African Proust. Okay, well, I don't know if there's an African Proust or not, but there isn't any American Proust either. So therefore, you shouldn't read American literature, according to that. And, you know, that kind of stuff is coming along all the time. There's also extremism at the other end. You know, there's a fringe that says, you know, let's toss off everything and just study rap. I mean, that fringe is so marginal you can't even find it. Most of the discussion is in a sort of a sane middle range, and it's dealing with real issues. I mean, as my comments may hint at, I think there's a lot of reason for enriching the canon. Enriching it in two directions. For one thing, teaching it so that it's meaningful, not rote learning. And for another, broadening it to include a much broader range of cultural contributions. But exactly how to do that is not so obvious. And there's plenty of ground for discussion about it.
The word canon is not more canon. Canon is not more a canon. A canon must be short, otherwise it's not a canon.
It's a canon in quotes. It's a collection of alternative paths that you can take through human culture.